I'm Yvonne Hamoud, registered social worker and owner of New Moon Counseling. But out of the office, I'm a mom, wife, daughter, sister, and friend. Join me each week as I sit with a special guest to discuss everyday things that impact our mental health. We'll be chatting about everything from mental health and relationships to media and current events, as well as personal experiences and reflections, all in the hopes of normalizing our humanness and helping you see that you're not alone. This is Outside the Therapy Room. Hi everyone, welcome to Outside the Therapy Room. I'm Yvonne, and today I am joined by Bethany.
Hello, I'm back.
You're back. We always have so much fun when you're here. We are talking today about inner critic. Yeah.
I love this topic. This comes up a lot. Comes up a lot in session. I see inner critic as something that often does hold us back from moving in the direction that we want to, and also something that's very attainable in terms of talking about it, figuring it out, and working with our inner critic to kind of hit the goals that we're looking to do. So I like the subject.
I do like the subject, and I think a lot of the times we hear about inner critic or negative self-talk or, whatever, however you want to describe it, but it is something that impacts us. It impacts us on a regular day-to-day basis. It can be difficult for us to, get certain things done because our inner critic can at times kind of keep us back. So I guess, now that we introduced the topic, what is inner critic?
Good question. I think of inner critic, and maybe this is because I watched the movie recently, but like one of those Inside Out characters on the control panel. So I think of inner critic as this internal voice that is criticizing or judging our actions, what we say, how we look, the choices that we make. I think our inner critic can be this kind of source of challenging ourselves from the inside, sometimes to anticipate what we think will happen on the outside, I think, right? Kind of going along, like, I used to be a very, self-deprecating jokester, right? Always making jokes that were at my own expense. And realizing that it was quite possible I was doing that because my inner critic was saying those things and saying, okay, if I vocalize them, if I say them out loud, nobody will think them of me or hurt me as much as I can hurt me.
Yeah. I already got it out there. So if anyone wanted to,
if someone wants to hurt me the most, you will always be second place. Because I can hurt me the most. And I think that became something that I struggled with when I was really having a hard time, when I needed support and it wasn't funny anymore. It was really difficult. And then having my own internal voice being another source that was holding me back. I think that's when I started kind of talking to my therapist about inner critic experience. So that's what I think it is. How would you define it?
I would define it the same way. I think it's just that there's a part of ourselves that's very critical of what we are doing, what we are thinking, and it can impact our behaviors. If we have an inner critic who's saying you're not enough or you're not good at this thing, it's going to impact then how we behave. We might either avoid doing certain things or we may do them really uncomfortably. There's just, it's just like this critical voice that's kind of putting you down at all these different times.
And that voice, that's the, 2 a.m. when I can't fall asleep, going through all the embarrassing things that have happened in my life. Yeah. I think that's the inner critic. Yeah. I think it's like, let's look at everything you've done wrong so that you can better align your behavior. And I just think it's a really intense and somewhat unhelpful way to do that. Yeah.
So I guess a question that's often asked is, why do we have an inner critic?
Why do we have an inner critic? Well, I think a lot of it comes from the information that we're consuming. The society that we live in is very critical. We work in workplaces where our performance is being judged, so there's criticism there. We consume media with ideal body types and ideal schedules. I talked about this in the blog post, but the idea of being someone that wakes up at 5 in the morning and drinks a glass of lemon water and
Yeah.
goes to Pilates and no hate to Pilates because I love Pilates, but this critic, I think, is coming from noticing the gap between what we think we should be and what we are. And I think that our society is constantly in a place of you need to be better, you need to be making more money, you need to be a better friend, a better person, a better partner, setting yourselves up for relationships that you want to be in. Like, I think the critic is almost that way of responding, but also antagonizing what we want for ourselves or what we think we want because society tells us what we think we should want. If that makes sense.
It does. And
Yeah.
I think definitely there's a strong kind of force that society has on us, and we want to not be different, and we want to be able to kind of find our way to fit the mold. And I think that's what our inner critic is trying to do.
Yes.
I think for me, my inner critic can sometimes come up out of, and I think for everybody it comes out of like a need for protection. There's a purpose to my inner critic telling me these things that are maybe really hard to hear. But I think it also can stem from the kind of messaging you received when you were younger.
Yes,
and so if you had a
absolutely.
parent that was quite critical of you when you were growing up, like, you're not smart enough, how can you not understand this math homework, why are you dressed like that, you have too much makeup on, you don't have enough makeup on, like whatever those kind of criticisms were when you were growing up, it kind of stays with you, and it can
Absolutely.
then form into this inner critic. And I think if we go back for a moment, now that I'm on this topic, if we go back, I can have understanding that our parents' criticism towards us comes from their own parents' criticism towards them.
Yes.
And kind of
so on. Yeah.
exactly, and so on. And I think like the underlying thing is anxiety. I'm criticizing my daughter in not wearing enough makeup because that was what my family always encouraged me to do, so that you look well put together and so people take you seriously, so you look professional. All of these things that they maybe felt anxious about, and so then shared that with their kid in a way that was more critical. And so
Absolutely, yeah.
I think again, like, that can come from that place of protection. So for me, like, my inner critic is telling me these things because it wants to make sure that I succeed, that I don't make a fool of myself, that, like, I am able to accomplish whatever the thing is in the right way, or that I'm putting myself in situations where I'm going to be successful instead of putting myself in situations where I'm going to look like a fool or where I don't know what I'm doing. And so I think there is a purpose to our inner critic, and that
Absolutely.
of protection. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to, we can maybe even split the inner critic into the habitual, ingrained, we don't really think about it inner critic, and then the effective but maybe in the wrong method inner critic. It's like, it does align with my values to succeed in this a way. However, to have a critic screaming at me to do it, as opposed to like a cheerleader or a really kind parent asking me to do it, I have like a really...
like a drill sergeant.
Yes, right? With a whistle. So I think, going off that, a question that I do ask clients is, when we're talking about the inner critic, whose voice is it? Because sometimes we might say, it's me, I'm saying it to myself, but then other times they might be exactly in that enactment of a generational criticism, and kind of say, okay, when I just said that sentence, for example, I shouldn't wear that dress because I look really fat in it. When I say that sentence, is that my voice, or is that a mom's voice, or a dad's voice, or a really annoying friend's voice? And I think that helps us differentiate how much do we want to align with our inner critic if our inner critic is someone who has maybe caused harm. I think that can affect in terms of if we are ready for change. Does it start with the people and the voices that we want to align better with.
Yeah.
And to not have them coming from ourselves. I think that's why it's both really challenging that we have this inner critic, but the fact that it's inner already says that's something you can work on. Exactly. That's something that's very attainable, especially in therapy, because it's inner. It's in the room with us when we're doing therapy, as opposed to we're talking about your partner, but your partner's not here. We're talking about your mom, but your mom's not here, right?
Yeah. And I also love to ask the question of like, whose voice is it? And then sometimes what can happen is if if it's like from a coach at school who's like telling you, you're so weak, you suck, why are you in this? In that moment, it may have worked as a motivator, quote unquote. Motivator.
Not the best way.
Not the
but,
best way,
right.
but it could have, but then that stays with you. And I think a lot of the times it can morph now. Instead of being your coach's voice, it has morphed into your own voice. And so instead of like, you suck, you're so weak, it's I suck, I'm too weak.
Right.
And so what I like to do in therapy too, similarly to what you mentioned, is let's put that voice back to the owner. Like, let's bring it back to the coach, even switching the I to you. So then it sounds like someone else is saying it, because it's easier sometimes for us mentally to fight back when someone is attacking us versus us attacking ourselves. And so when we do switch it from I suck to, oh, you suck, you're like, no, I don't. Like, that's not true. I don't suck. I'm really good at all these other things. That's really mean.
Like, that's a terrible thing to say.
You're able to kind of talk back to that voice. And you can also eventually learn how to lower the volume on that voice. So it might not always go away, but you can, like, you
quiet it down and turn up another one. And,
exactly, the more positive one. And so, like, these are great examples that we have on, like, what inner critic is or what it can look like. But yeah, a lot of the times it sounds like you're not enough, you're not going to succeed, you don't look good, or, just not the kindest things that we could be saying to ourselves.
Absolutely. And to have that voice in your own head can be very debilitating. Absolutely. I think we all have our own experiences of that voice doesn't go away just because you're around other people, or it doesn't go away just because the stressor was gone. For example, maybe the inner critic is a bit louder before a job interview because you want to do well, you want to show up in the best way. Don't say that, don't do this, don't wear that, it's not professional. And then you do the interview, but the inner critic doesn't quite react in the like, you did it, it's done. Instead, that inner critic is still like, remember when you answered that question and you said 16 times? Yeah. That was terrible. You're not going to get the job. They didn't like you. They looked you up and down as soon as you walked in the room.
The outfit I was wearing wasn't good.
Yeah. Is that really what you chose to wear? And I think that's what's important about looking at that inner critic experience is, yes, it could have been motivating, but similar to feelings experience, it doesn't end when the threat is gone. Right? It doesn't end when the thing we were trying to get to is done. It sticks around. And I do not think that's effective or helpful, because if you leave a job interview, for example, right? You left. You did it. Ball's not in your court anymore. Yeah. Good job. That must have been scary. Yeah. I always get a coffee afterwards.
Like a little treat. You did it.
Get a little treat. I did it.
How does inner critic impact our mental health? Because what you just brought up is like, that's a very common thing that I think a lot of people could relate to, that you do leave the interview and now you're stuck kind of replaying all of the things, but not in a way of like, hey, I answered that really well. Maybe sometimes and for some people, but speaking about inner critic, it can also be, we're just focusing on all these negative things and we're really being like picky at, they looked at me this way, that must mean this. And so, absolutely. So how does it impact our mental health?
Yeah. I think the inner critic, similar to the experience of, let's say, anxiety or really low mood, I think it pulls you away from reality, right? The volume is so high that with the inner critic, we stop taking in information from our environment that works against our inner critic. Yeah. So I'll use the job interview example because it's fresh. Yeah. But thinking about when you leave that interview, the things that are happening in your head are now sticking around, telling you how you perform. Now we're making up things, trying to grasp control over things that we don't have control over, right?
Yeah.
In a job interview, unfortunately, they could have someone else in mind. They could be interviewing you as a formality. They could love you. They could be so excited that you're going to join the company. There's such a variety of what could happen because it's not in your hands, period. But the inner critic will move in a very kind of insular direction of the outcome of this could only be bad. And if it's good, it's probably not because of anything you did. Right?
Right.
So
it discredits
yeah. It doesn't take in all the information. It might take in the information that feeds it. So the question that you hesitated on objectively has the same value as the question that you answered so incredibly, and they all said, wow, good answer. But that inner critic might say that didn't happen, or kind of ignores that and says, remember this one, this is what they're leaving with. And that's just not the reality. You had such a variety, and the inner critic is saying, well, it's probably just the really negative things. So we're not able to take in everything from our environment. We're not able to take in maybe the things that discredit our inner critic. And I think that impacts mental health in terms of we kind of sink into that darker hole of I don't feel very grounded. I don't really know how I'm being perceived because I will automatically assume that people are perceiving me in the way that my inner critic perceives me, which is not good.
Right. Yeah. I think even with that example, like, again, you take that on and you're like, I wasn't enough. They don't like me. They're not going to like me. I'm stupid. I answered that question wrong. They're going to see that I'm, not good at this position, or that I'm not going to be able to do a good job. All of these things, which can then impact our sense of, like, our self-esteem, our confidence. It can then impact how we present ourselves in the world. And so our behavior may change when when our partner asks us, oh, how did your interview go? We might be really annoyed, or, ugh, don't talk about it. And then that can impact the behavior that, the way that we behave for the rest of the day. But I think, apart from this example that we shared, the inner critic can also show up in the interpretation, or I guess the perception we think other people have of us.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
In relationship dynamics, that can be really hard because, for example, I may be there with my partner and he may be in a really low mood, and right away my inner critic is like, you did something wrong.
Yeah, he's mad at you.
He's mad at you. He doesn't like you. You are this. He's thinking about someone else. All of these, like, just a spiral of negative things all of a sudden comes up, which then impacts your anxiety. So now you're feeling more anxious. You might become angry and upset at your partner because he's, like, clearly going through something. When the reality, if we, like, zoom out for a moment, he may have had a really bad day at work and it has absolutely nothing to do with you, but your inner critic just takes these like its observations and its perception of other people's behavior to mean that it's something that we are lacking or that is our fault. And so it can definitely impact, like we said, increased anxiety. It can then impact our sleep when, you mentioned it, like 2 a.m. in the morning. Inner critic is coming up and talking about all of these things. And it can also impact our relationships and how we show up in them. Our anxiety, like, it can impact our mood as well, where we're not feeling good about ourselves. I think especially for us as women, there's so much comparison, what you made earlier about, like, the kind of expectation that society has on us and body image expectation, all of these things that we see out there. And if we're constantly telling ourselves that we are too big or not small enough, or that we have, like, there's that Mean Girls scene when they're like naming all, like, my pores are too big, like, and then like Katie's like, or Katie's like, I thought the only thing was, like, fat or thin that women had. But if we're constantly kind of just, that inner critic is bringing up all of these negative things about us, that can lead to depression, that can lead to sadness. Like, just, there can be a strong impact on our mental health when our inner critic is very loud, or when we're allowing it to be present all the time.
And I think that spiral then leads into avoidance,
Yeah.
which then kind of allows the inner critic to get louder. So, for example, I look terrible, so I'm not going to go out for dinner with my friends tonight. Then the inner critic says, see, you can't go out, you can't do things, you shouldn't put yourself out there because it's unsafe, it's a bad idea, people won't like you. And then you do start to not engage in the things that could disprove that because we're already feeling so low.
And also isolation, right? Then we isolate ourselves from those interactions.
And we're not given the opportunities to be proven wrong, which I think could feel really good. You know, you go out to dinner with your friends and they say, oh my gosh, I love your nails. Like, this is so fun. I haven't seen you in forever. You know, it's very healthy to challenge our inner critic, and we can be very understanding that when we're experiencing low mood, it feels very uncomfortable to want to challenge those beliefs. And I think that's what often makes them get worse. Leading to more isolation, leading to less taking in of disproving things, disconnection from reality. It can be very harsh.
It can. Yeah, with that too, it can impact our decision making and our own personal growth if we're not trusting ourselves, or if our inner critic is telling us that the choices that we make are not right, then we can have a harder time making those decisions or growing, like you said, right? Like, I want to engage more with people, I want to socialize more, and then your inner critic's like, no, why? You're not good enough, or you don't look good right now, and then it goes into the isolation.
Absolutely. And I think too, it can definitely affect our decision making in terms of, if we're not going to put ourselves out there, the perception often leads into that belief of I couldn't do better, right? So that comes up a lot in terms of relationships, right? If you're in a relationship with someone who has some toxic behavior or who speaks down to you, that then kind of goes along with that inner critic, becomes that internalized belief of, this is the best I could do. If I was not in this relationship, I would be entirely alone, and that would be the worst thing on earth, right? It's the decision-making process of, I cannot manage change. I will not be able to handle it. I will not find another relationship, will not find other friendships, because the beliefs that I've created here must be true because they're around me every day.
Yeah.
Right? And so the decision making can become, yes, in that relationship, but also, I don't deserve to get a higher paying job. I don't deserve to move into a new apartment that maybe costs a little bit more. I don't deserve to
leave this relationship.
I don't deserve to eat healthier or spend my money on things that make me happy. I don't deserve rest, right? I don't deserve time away from chores and work and socializing. I think that can deeply affect our behavior, and then we're losing energy too. We're losing the thoughts that can motivate change, and therefore it's further increasing that stuckness that we see a lot in terms of relationships. We see a lot in terms of experience of depression. We feel stuck.
And I think you brought up a point too about hearing the inner critic voice, like the messaging outside of yourself, so through friendships or relationships. And I think sometimes we align ourselves into those individuals because there is a sense of familiarity in that, like, oh, my inner critic is saying this all, not maybe not in this way, like it's not as simple as our black and white
but
it's like there's some similarities between this person and what I'm thinking. Or, you know, there is like this sense of familiarity in that can put us in relationships that maybe
it's like
aren't
comfort
the
and alignment. Like, you match what I believe, therefore I have two sources of information, therefore it must be reality.
Exactly.
No.
And that's not the case. Yeah. So, what do we do with this now that we were able to kind of identify what an inner critic is? What do we do? How do we either overcome or befriend our inner critic?
The first place that I moved to is self-compassion.
Yes.
I first learned about self-compassion from an incredible therapist when I was in fourth year university. And I read Kristen Neff's book, Self-Compassion, I love. For me, self-compassion is the idea that if we are with our own internal voices at all times, we are with ourselves more than we will ever be with our friends or partners or parents or coworkers. We are stuck with ourselves in a way.
Yeah.
And if we dislike ourselves, that's like hanging out with a bully all day, every day. You would hate it. You would get so sick of them. You would want to push them away. And yet we have internalized it and sat with it and said, this is how it's supposed to be. So I think what self-compassion does is it says, if we are going to be with ourselves at all times, how can we be the person that we need, that we want to spend time with, right? So when it comes to the inner critic, I find it helps to start in terms of self-compassion with kind of what you said earlier, externalize the voice, using the you words. You look terrible today, right? It's mean words. If a friend said that to you, how would you feel about that friend? You might say, oh, that was a bit jarring. Maybe I'm not wearing my favorite outfit today because it's laundry day, but that was really mean. And you don't know the story behind what I'm wearing today. And you are coming at me and you're not even really saying, hi, how's it going? Right? Once we externalize it, we can say, okay, if we were with the friend that said, you look terrible today, would we want to be with that friend tomorrow and the next day and the next day? No, we would probably want to drift away from them. So if that's how we feel about our inner critic voice, how can we be friends with that voice? How can we lower the judgment because she or they are with us at all times?
Yeah, I like that. And I also, something to add there is also how would I respond to a friend if they said this out loud? Because we may stand up for ourselves and be like, that was kind of rude. And we can say that to ourselves in that moment, right? Like, that was kind of a rude thing I just thought, or I just said to myself, like, maybe this isn't my favorite outfit because it's laundry day, but it's okay. I'm comfortable. Or I feel okay right now. Or I really like how my hair turned out. Like, you are still able to respond to this inner critic or this like inner friend in a way that is gentler to yourself instead of being like, yep, you're right. Right? Like, we can still stand up for ourselves. I think, yes, self-compassion is definitely a huge one to look at. And I think also being gently curious and reflexive on where did this criticism come from? Is it mine? Where was it developed? What, like, did it just randomly come up? Because maybe there was a part of myself I was trying to protect, and this inner critic was trying to do that in some way, and kind of just holding space for that. Before we started recording, and you had mentioned something about IFS, which is internal family systems. We've had an episode on that before with the amazing Melissa, and she was actually here with us, and she gave us a little workshop on IFS.
She's awesome.
She is awesome. So shout out to Melissa Pine from Inner Trailheads Therapy. But yeah, do you want to say what that was?
I really like the idea of curiosity, and I carry that especially when I see clients and we're talking about inner critic, because it's an internalized voice. It might be coming from somewhere and it might be goal directed. And so what Melissa taught us about IFS was, let's try and have the idea that all of our internal parts, including that inner critic voice, are coming with good intentions. If we believe that they all have good intentions, can we start to see what is that voice trying to serve? what does that voice want me to hear when it's being really critical?
Yeah.
Right? So, I don't like the outfit that you're wearing today. Critical, if we're curious about it, my inner critic voice is saying, I don't like the outfit you're wearing because it's making me feel insecure. It's making me feel worried of being judged. And I was maybe judged in the past because I wore bright colors instead of like neutrals. You know, that's way oversimplifying it.
Yeah.
But what we can do is say, okay, that voice wants you to feel comfortable. That's a very kind and important thing. We do want to feel comfortable. We want to feel safe. And saying you look terrible is not the best way to accomplish that.
Yeah.
So how can we hear the intention of that voice, which is safety, and respond to it in a way that hears it but doesn't force us to adhere to it and appreciate it in the tone that it has, right? So yes, maybe this is not my favorite outfit. However, I know the people that I'm going to see today are really kind. And they will say nice things, if anything, about my outfit, because sometimes we don't talk about what we're wearing. We're going to do an activity, and wearing leggings or sweatpants is more important so that I can move around. So it is a good idea to wear something like this. And maybe I'll bring another pair of jeans if I want to change afterwards, right? So allowing ourselves to be curious lets us kind of get into, what are you trying to say, and how can we say that in a useful, helpful way to make us feel prepared without feeling like that has to come from harm.
Yeah. I also like let's thank the inner critic for a moment, to be like, thank you for wanting to protect me from judgment of other people, but I'm okay. Like, exactly what you said. I got this. I know the group of people I'm going out with. I am going to be safe. And so being able to kind of, like, talk to your inner critic in a kind way, which practices that self-compassion. But sometimes even in the job interview example that we had earlier, like, what does the inner critic want in that moment? It wants you to get the job. It wants you to have security. Like, thank you for wanting me to get this job. But looking at it negatively is not helping me right now. And so I'm just going to get myself a nice coffee, and I'm going to treat myself. And I know everything I could do, I've done already. And now I just kind of have to leave and see what happens. But you can at least acknowledge what your inner critic's purpose was in that moment. And so we're simplifying this a lot. It's obviously a lot harder to do this in the moment. And I think the first step actually before all of this is being able to identify your inner critic, right? Like, recognize the negative self-talk, pay attention to it when it shows up, be aware of maybe how is it showing up? What triggered that?
What mood are you in when it comes in?
Like, was there something that triggered it? Like, what was that? Where did that come from? Why do you think, like, still being able to use all of, like, the curiosity pieces of it, but being able to identify your inner critic is obviously going to be the first step of befriending it or overcoming it.
Absolutely. And so I think it is that very mindful, slow down process. So that can come about when you're feeling really terrible. It's quite likely that your thoughts are matching that. So taking that moment of pause, going to bed and thinking about things over and over. What was your day like that day? Do you feel really tired? Did you eat something that gave you energy? Or did you do the things that you like to do before going to bed? Because we can collect a lot more information from what is putting us in a terrible mood while we're in it, because then we can kind of break it down. Whereas it can be very challenging to kind of target the idea of inner critic if we don't really know what's happening when we're experiencing kind of highs and lows. So I think, what we're talking about a lot today are things that I go to with clients that I've seen for a good amount of time. Right? These are people that have had the chance to kind of explore their lives in that way. And when I first start with clients, it's really about, okay, can you try, I always get people to write it down in their notes app on their phone, because it's right there. We're on our phones at all times. So write down any repeated thoughts that feel like they put you in a certain mood. And then we could look at that thought, like, I'm bad at my job. Okay. When do you feel bad at your job? Is it in the morning when you're running late and trying to get there? Is it when you get an email from your boss and now you feel really nervous? When do you feel this? And then that's the kind of beginning therapy process, but also the beginning find the inner critic process, where we can understand what's the repeated thought and how are our thoughts stopping it or keeping it going.
Yeah, it's that awareness piece. And you're right in terms, like, when in therapy, we're slowing it down. We're being like, first step, pay attention.
Yes.
Right? And that
that's
can take
hard.
weeks.
That can take a long time.
That can take a very long time. And so like I think we say often, like, just be patient when you are trying to identify that inner critic. And I love what you mentioned in terms of, like, listen to your body, because our body at the end of the day might be completely drained. But when we're able to kind of pause and take a step back and be like, why am I feeling so drained today? We can sometimes reflect back and be like, oh, I wasn't thinking so great about myself earlier today, or I felt really, really like negative about my quality of work, or you know, how good of an employee I am, or how good of a friend I am, whatever the thing could be. And then from there you can identify your inner critic. You know, to share like a personal example, like, I have a lot of inner critic about this podcast, like an inner critic about this podcast of like, who's even gonna listen to this? No one's gonna
what
care.
do people care about?
It's like, no one's gonna care about what you have to say. You're nobody huge, right?
Yvonne.
I know. Worked on working. It's
always a work in progress.
It's a work in progress. But like, it can definitely come up that way. And so when I've paid attention to it, because sometimes when I'm like thinking about, you know, next guests, I'm like, what's the point? Like, that's the way that inner critic voice impacts me. It's like, well, what's the point of recording this if no one's going to listen to it? And so in that moment, I can be like, okay, wait, hold up. That's a little harsh. Maybe everyone isn't going to listen to it, and that's okay. But hopefully a couple of people will be able to listen to it and really feel validated or feel supported, and that would feel really good for me.
Right. And that it could be one person who hears the episode and says, oh, that's what I needed today.
Exactly.
And that's entirely worth it.
Exactly. And that's really kind of me being able to talk back to my inner critic. And I can, like, you know, see my inner critic and be like, okay, my inner critic wants me to succeed. It wants me to do well. It knows I'm like managing 5 million hats all at once. And it's like, you know, we want you to succeed in all of these areas. And so I can understand that and appreciate that from my inner critic, and maybe even thank it. Like, thanks for wanting me to be successful or whatever.
On top of everything,
And that's not helping me. And so I'm okay with 1 or 2 listeners who really feel great about it, and that's fine. And so I think, it definitely comes up for all of us. I think if someone tells you they have no inner critic, I'm like, what's wrong? Are you human?
Yeah, it'd be pretty hard not to. I think, especially with that podcast idea too, it's putting yourself out there. It's a sense of vulnerability in exploring something you haven't done before. That is often when our inner critic will be so loud, because it's about safety. It's about stay in your zone of control, because sometimes it feels like stepping outside of it is terrifying and a bad idea.
Right.
And it doesn't want you to make mistakes.
Yes.
And so it's really healthy for our inner critic to say, I hear you and I'm going to try it. Not but, and I'm going to try it. And we'll see how it goes. And I'm going to put myself out there in that way. And instead, you know, our inner critic might think, okay, this is the equivalent to jumping off a cliff. Right. You do the podcast and you say, okay, I stepped off the curb. Like, it's okay, right? It doesn't have to feel like this big jump. And so that curiosity is huge. What does my critic want here? Okay, she wants me to stay in my zone. She wants me to feel safe and secure in the things that I'm doing. And I feel pretty good about that right now. So I could maybe try branching out. And if it doesn't work for me, I know how to not film a podcast, so there you go.
Or at least I tried it.
At least I tried it, and I knew if it was for me or not for me. I hear that a lot about jobs.
Yeah.
Hating your job. what good information that is.
Yeah.
You found out something that you do not want to do in future.
Yeah.
That's great.
It narrows things down. That's
and
wonderful.
It doesn't have to say anything about your abilities, because jobs don't fit all of us.
Yeah.
And we do have to explore, and we're lucky to often be in positions to be able to explore. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think just one last thing to add to this, my personal story, is also like the reshifting. Like
Yes.
maybe my inner critic wanted to focus on success, but I'm having a lot of fun doing this podcast. So
There you go.
success,
Yeah.
is that really necessary? For some people, sure. But in this moment, like I'm having a blast talking to everybody
Right.
and making those connections. And so that's important to me. So being able to kind of, again, if your inner critic is like, you didn't do good in your interview, being able to come back and be like, yeah, but I was able to practice in that moment, and maybe I'll know something a little bit differently, or I'll know better, or I'll, be able to find tweak my answers a little bit for the next interview that I have.
Right.
So being able to, again, just look at things in a different perspective when you're responding back to your inner critic.
And I think that goes back to the idea of just allowing yourself to be a full person, right? That you can be the professional answering the phone calls, answering the emails person, and you can be the fun podcast maker because you enjoy doing it. You know, it's like my work is very different than the TV shows that I watch, than the fun things I do outside of work, because we're all full people that are filled with variety. And I think our inner critic sometimes wants us to stay small. And it's so helpful mental health wise to be able to branch out, targeting your curiosity, the things that you do for fun, the people that you want to spend time with, the things that advance your career, the things that make your partner happy, right? We can branch out in many, many ways, and it actually just makes us a stronger person. And our inner critic can kind of sit comfortably when we allow ourselves to open up our circle first. Then it can say, okay, this size of a circle is actually also within my control.
Yeah. And your comment brought something in my head that probably has absolutely nothing to do with it, but there's an episode on New Girl where Jess is very, bubbly and girly and wears polka dots and is super cute. And there's an episode where she's talking to a lawyer girl. It's one of, what's his name, Nick's girlfriends. And she makes judges her in some way by being like, maybe this like little girl innocent thing gets you things. And she was able to stand up for herself in the moment and say, like, I am more than this. I can be I can be a professional teacher. I can do all of these wonderful things. And I like polka dots, and I like glitter, and I like all of these other things. And that's okay. So I don't know if that like had a place in this conversation.
It does, because I think it goes back to the societal expectation, and often a huge expectation on women, that you are one thing. So a lawyer, for example, you are a lawyer.
You have to
You are a professional. You are not a fun friend because you don't make jokes. You're serious. Well, but you're a human being,
but that's
right?
just your job.
That's your job. That's one aspect. Back to that inside out example. Like we have all the islands. Like we can't just have the one
island.
That we are people made of variety, and I think that's what keeps us very healthy, when you have many, many options for feeling good and taking care of yourself, whether it's doing a craft activity or getting back into playing soccer because you haven't done it in 5 years, like whatever that looks like. So I think it goes back to the inner critic. Like your example was great because it goes back to the inner critic idea of staying small is what pulls us away from reality, and being someone that is able to branch out and have variety means you have many, many different points of security.
Like you're not professional enough, no one's going to take you seriously on those polka dots, whatever. Like all of those like inner critic things.
It's like Legally Blonde.
Great movie.
She's a great lawyer.
Well, yes, all about inner critic today. We encourage you to maybe start practicing some of the tools. The very first one, just maybe be a little bit more curious about your negative self-talk or the inner critic and when it shows up. And yeah, I think we are kind of getting to the last few episodes before we close off our first season. That's so
Nice,
crazy.
very good.
And our next episode is one I'm really excited about. It's going to be all about sex and relationships. So
Ooh,
I hope you all tune
fun.
in
Yeah.
for the next episode next week. But yeah, thank you so much, Bethany, for coming here and talk. Like I said, we always
Thank
have so much
you.
fun
We do,
having
yes.
our chats. But yeah, I encourage you to share the episode with people around you. You can also subscribe so that you can get notifications for any new episodes. Make sure to follow us on social media as well at Outside the Therapy Room Pod. And thank you so much. We will see you next time.
Yay, thank you. Go outside today.
Yes, it's so nice. It's springtime now.
Good.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Outside the Therapy Room. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you reside in Ontario and are interested in working with one of our therapists, please visit our website in the show notes. If you reside outside of Ontario, a quick Google search or search through Psychology Today will help you find a therapist near you.